10. The Love Potion. And thereupon we perceive, now that it is half disclosed, what caused the myth to take form and the very necessity whereby it was brought forth. So dreadful and unutterable is the real meaning of passion that not only are those persons who undergo it unable to grow aware of its end, but also writers wishing to depict it in all its marvelous violence are driven to employ the deceptive language of symbols. I shall set aside for the moment the question whether or not the authors of the 5 original poems were aware of what they were writing about. It is first imperative to make plain what I wish to imply by the word deceptive, which I have just used. Thanks to the popularization of psychoanalysis, we now commonly take it for granted that the existence of a repressed wish is invariably manifested, though in such a way as to disguise the true nature of this wish. A forbidden passion or a shameful love finds expression in the symbols of a hieroglyphic language which consciousness leaves undeciphered. The language is essentially equivocal in both senses of the verb. It betrays what it wishes to say without saying it. A single gesture or a single metaphor may thus express at one and the same time both the object of a wish and what condemns the wish. The prohibition is thus recognized, and the object is not, and yet the latter is being alluded to. In this way, irreconcilable demands are to some extent simultaneously satisfied. Two needs, that of speaking of what delights and that of avoiding to decide whether the delightful is good or bad, and two instincts, that of courting danger and that of taking care, are all 4 gratified. If anybody using this language is asked why the predilection for this or that apparently weird image, the answer will be that it's perfectly natural, that he hasn't the remotest idea, or that he doesn't think it matters. If the person questioned is a poet, he will drag in inspiration or poetic license. In no circumstances will he have any hesitation in showing that he is in no way responsible. Now, consider the problem that must have confronted the author of the original romance. The symbolical material available in the 12th century for concealing what had also to be expressed was magic, on the one hand, and the rhetoric of chivalry on the other. How convenient are these forms of expression is something immediately obvious. Magic persuades without giving reasons, and is perhaps persuasive to precisely the extent that it withholds reasons. Like all rhetoric, the rhetoric of chivalry is a means of passing off the most obscure statements as natural. It was an ideal mask, for it ensured secrecy all right, and also ensured that the approval of the reader would be unconditional. Chivalry was the rule which the leading caste was hoping to employ to check the wildest follies that were felt to be threatening the framework of its society. The customs of chivalry were thus bound to supply the romance with its armature. And I have repeatedly indicated how the prohibitions of chivalry proved to be perfect pretexts for the progression of the narrative. Magic comes in because the passion which has to be depicted has a fascinating violence not to be accepted without qualms. Passion appears uncouth in its effects. The church proscribes it as sinful, and common sense looks upon it as a morbid excess. It is thus not open to admiration till it has been freed from every kind of visible connection with human responsibility. That is why it was indispensable to bring in the love potion, which acts willy-nilly and, better still, is drunk by mistake. Thomas, who seeks to minimize the part played by this magical influence, is driven to making passion less inhuman and hence more tolerable to a moralist. Inferior in this respect to Bérulle, he is the first writer to degrade the myth. The love potion is thus an alibi for passion. It enables each of the two unhappy lovers to say, "You see, I am not in the least to blame. You see, it's more than I can help." Yet thanks to this deceptive necessity, everything they do is directed towards the fatal fulfillment they are in love with. And they can approach this fulfillment with a kind of crafty determination and a cunning the more unerring for not being open to moral judgment. Our least calculated actions are sometimes the most effective. A stone which we throw without aiming hits the mark. Actually, we aimed at the mark all right, but consciousness was not given time to interfere and deflect our spontaneous movement. That is why the finest passages in the romance are those where the authors did not see how to dilate upon events and wrote as if in perfect innocence. There would be no myth and no romance if Tristan and Isolde were able to say what is the end they are making ready for in the depths, indeed in the abyss of their wills. Who would dare admit that he seeks death and detests offensive day? That what he longs for with all his being is the annihilation of his being? Much later on, poets arose who did dare to make this crowning avowal, but the masses said of them, they are mad, and the passion which most novelists wish to please in the reader is seemingly something weaker. It is unlikely ever to be driven to proclaim itself by undeniable excess, by a death in which it would be manifested beyond any possible repentance. Some of the mystics have gone further than avowal. They have understood and explained, but if they were able to face the dark night with a most strict and lucid passion, it was because through faith they had won a pledge that an altogether personal and luminous will would take the place of theirs. Their willpower was not seized upon by the nameless god of the love potion, a blind force or nothingness, but by the God who promises his grace, and the living flame of love that burns in the deserts of the night. But Tristan can make no avowal. His longing is as if he had it not. He confines himself inside an unverifiable and unjustifiable truth, from any understanding of which he recoils with horror. He has his excuse ready, and it is pervasively specious. It is the poison which par force le domaine, and yet that he has chosen his fate and willed and welcomed it in a dark and complete assent is betrayed by everything he does, down to his desperate flight, a sublime coxcombry. And at the same time, it is essential to the exemplary grandeur of his life that he should be unaware of his fate. Night has its reasons which are not those of day, and they cannot be made known to day. In Wagner's drama, when the king surprises the lovers and asks for the undiscovered deep and secret cause of all, Tristan replies, F. Jameson's translation of the poem, "King Mark, that I can never tell thee, and what thou askest, that canst thou ne'er discover." Later, when dying, Tristan says too, "Where I awoke I stayed not, yet where I tarried, that I can never tell thee. It was where I had been forever, where I for aye shall go, the boundless realm of night's domain. There one thing alone is ours, deep, eternal, all-forgetting, this terrible yearning wasting my heart. If I could name it, if thou couldst know it." Day they despise. Tristan has delivered himself over to a madness that must rob him of wisdom, truth, and life itself. He has traveled beyond our pleasure and pain. He is hastening forward to the supreme moment in which delight is all concentrated on foundering. Night cannot be described in the language of day, but this particular form of desire has not lacked and has indeed produced an artful music. Arise, deep-sounding tempests of Tristan and Isolde's death. The hero sings, "Old tune so full of sadness, that sing'st thou, that sing'st thy sad complaint. Through evening breezes came that strain, as once my father's death I learned in childhood. Through morning twilight sadder sounding, as to me my mother's fate was told. He who begot me died, she dying gave me birth. The olden ditty's mournful plaint, e'en so to them its numbers came, that strain that asks me still what fate for me was chosen. When there my mother bore me, what fate for me the olden ditty once more tells me. 'Tis yearning and dying. Yearning now calls for death's repose. He may curse his stars and his birth, but the music is indeed artful, and its notes make known tremendously the lovely secret. It is he who has willed his own fate. The terrible draught that this anguish has brought, 'tis I myself by whom it was wrought. What I have drunken, what day by day has gladdened my spirit.